So I just got back from watching The Northman, the new Viking movie directed by Robert Eggers that tells the story of Amleth, well, Prince of Ynglinga, but Prince of Hrafnkels in the movie. It's almost irritating how good the movie is, I'll be honest. It's very good. It is both the movie I hoped it would be and the movie I feared it would be if I had to sum up in one sentence. So let's unpack that a little, why don't we? The movie is loosely based on the story of Amleth as found in the Gesta Danorum, a text written in Latin in Denmark around 1200 by Saxo Grammaticus. In it, it's basically akin to Shakespeare's story. Feng kills Horwendel, or Oirvandil, Amleth's father. Amleth knows this, he acts crazy, he kills a spy, Polonius. He gets shipped off to England. He switches out a message to kill those who were bringing the message to him, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. The King of England supports him. He comes back to his own funeral, gets everyone drunk, burns the farm down, kills Fang, becomes king. Familiar. Notably, in the source material, while Amleth does die a couple years later in battle, he does survive the revenge plot. The Northmen, being, after Shakespeare and directly borrowing from Shakespeare's Hamlet, has a significantly higher body count and far fewer survivors. Anyway, the parts I liked. It's so clear how much influence the historical consultants had. I don't know all of them. There was a team of, looked like 7 that were credited as working on the movie, but the 3 I do know are Terry Gunnell, Neil Price, and Johanna Katrin Friedrichsdottir. And what's incredible is that I could detect their influence in so many ways, and every single one of them, there was something where I'm like, wait, this is what they do. So, with how Nicole Kidman's character Gwyldrun acts, definitely feels in line with how Johanna Katrin has described how elite women are supposed to act in saga narratives in Valkyrie, the Women of the Viking World. The focus on archaeology of magic and religion is very Neil Price, and the specific rituals described, especially regarding Freyr and the worship of Freyr, is very Terry Gunnell. And so it's like, this is all very, very present in ways that make a lot of sense. And so this seeps through basically every aspect. Materially, this is single-handedly, far and away, without a doubt, the best depiction of the Norse world ever. There are some really detailed kind of Erdnest-style carvings in all the longhouses. There are gulguber, little tiny gold foils that are pinned up on the pillars in Oirvandel's hall. The costuming is immaculate. It's so perfectly detailed, with the few textiles that survive, and more importantly, all of the descriptions that survive. Even the use of furs and wolfskins are restricted to ways that make a lot of sense. It's so detailed in ways that are really very cool materially, and they couldn't have done a better job. I don't think anyone will ever do a better job. They also do this really cool thing where they just acknowledge that these rituals that are being performed are impactful in the psychologies of the people. And they do that in a very ambiguous way, so you're never quite sure whether something is actually, happening, whether there actually is a fight with an undead, or whether Amleth is just imagining it. But it still is depicted in a very detailed way, and in a way that's very honest to saga narratives, and so reflects, to me, it mostly reflects Alvin Jakobsson's work on the sort of psychology of monstrosity and the ways in which monstrosity is imbued in the landscape. But they're just acting in ways that make a lot of sense, imposing supernatural explanations onto the world. It's great. I love that so much. It's hard to describe it because it gets into a mindset that is almost uncommunicable. But when you see it, Eggers does some incredibly cool stuff with the cinematography and the editing and just the way action takes place, and that lets it be ambiguous. The last thing that's so cool is that there's a lot of little hints in here that really highlight some of the diversities possible. There's one scene early on where they're raiding a settlement in the Rus, somewhere to the north of modern-day Kiev, and after the raid, which has this troop of Berserker, of which Amleth is part of, come through and raise this town. Someone comes riding through on a horse who seems to be divvying up the spoils. That person is female, and based on her getup, I believe is intended to be the inhabitant of the grave in BJ 581, thing that Neil Price was part of the team that worked on. Made big waves in the scholarly community in 2017 and again in 2019, with arguing that the inhabitant of that, which is probably the most richly appointed grave on the island of Birka, was inhabited by a woman. Just tiny details like that. She shows up for maybe 3 seconds, but it's there. And the fact that they're doing that really is cool. That makes sense, right? There are a couple places where they're adopting things that are very much popular, right? The idea that you must die in battle in order to go to Valhalla is pretty much just from the Prose Edda, and there are saga narratives that do seem to contradict this, even though elite people die in battle in the King sagas all the damn time. But really, this appears to be adopting a bit of what I would view as propaganda by old people, who are very resentful that they are still alive, which is a stock trope in the sagas and a stock character in the sagas. So, I don't know. I don't hate that they're making that choice. It lets them set up this kind of Olivinic versus Freyr vague religious conflict thing, but in ways that are quiet enough that it doesn't really become a focal point for most of the movie. So those are all the things I really like about it on first viewing. I will need to see it again to try and pick up more details. But there's a few things that I think are a problem. On the really nitty, tiny detail things, there's a point where Amleth meets a Save Mother or a Vitki, either way, male sorcerer. And he's got a bit of birch bark stuck to his forehead, and on that appears to be a Galdra staff. It looked like it was an ice helmet, but I was sitting too far back in the theater to know for sure. This is something attested from late medieval and post-medieval grimoires. It would not be in the 9th century, period. This seems to be marking someone who's a magician, but they already do that with a drum that's clearly drawing from, like, Sami, no idea. Which is all cool, great, love it. Terry Gunnell and Richard Cole have both argued that that's kind of a direction that the field needs to start focusing on in religious studies, so representing that, excellent. But it's like, come on. You did so perfectly with all of that, and then you put an IS helmet there. For no discernible reason, you didn't need it. Not great. But bigger issues, I think, emerge in the treatment of Olga of the Birchwoods, and then from there spiraling into a larger critique of the saga narratives. So, Olga's severely underutilized, but unfortunately, right, while they do a really good job with the language of Old Ukrainian, and representing the idea that Slavic religious beliefs are meaningfully different from Norse ones, and there's a lot of diversity available there, they make her into just, like, full-on animism, even when they're, like, being very careful to not do that with Norse rituals. She, like, speaks to the Daughters of the North Wind, or the Earth Mother, and it's all very, very weird. It's all very kind of pop cultural animism, and, like, I sympathize because there's so little about pre-Christian Slavic religions. There's effectively nothing. Like, you need to fill that with something. It feels like that something is a bit more of a stereotype, and in a character who already pretty much exists as, like, a romantic interest and a fly-Ygric supplier for our male hero, I don't love it. She's such a good character, but she's so underutilized, and the way she is utilized is a bit stereotypy. Another thing I dislike is that they seem to be working off of the idea of the kind of Berserker as this Odinic warrior that goes into trances via religious ritual prior to battle and then run about wearing wolfskins, being otherwise naked. That's fine, but it's very much reminiscent of an idea in Indo-European comparative religious studies called the Menabund, kind of the gathering of young men. Jan de Vries in Algermanische Religiongeschichte is probably the clearest proponent of this, though Georges Dumézil does as well. And I don't know, right? There's been recent research by Roderick Dale and others that complicates that image, right? This is very much the Ynglinga saga depiction of Berserker, but I'm not in the camp that thinks that that's such a thing. And regardless, what it does is it's this like ultra masculine as a mode of inflicting more effective violence. I don't love it. They don't quite do enough to explore the ways in which this just traumatizes everyone involved. It's really funny after the battle, they're all just sitting there just wheezing, and it's excellent because that much adrenaline, regardless of how you start the Berserk frenzy, that much adrenaline is just gonna wipe you out. But I wanted to see more critiquing that, and it never quite gets there. And that's probably the biggest problem with this. Because clearly, the Northman is interested in critiquing the hyper-masculine violence of the sagas. And you might hear some scholars go like, well, this isn't a real saga narrative. There's a few things where I would agree with that on. There's some places where it's making odd decisions, and decisions that don't really fit a saga style. The fight at a volcano, the fact that everyone dies, the lack of legal cases. Some of those types of things are very much not in the saga style that the Northman is drawing most direct inspiration from. But at the same time, it's disingenuous to say that violence and this revenge feud is not part of the sagas. It is. And it is so close to being executed really well. But the big problem with this is just that this hyper-masculine revenge narrative isn't all that much a story I think needs to be told anymore. I don't think it's a story that ever needed to be told, and there's some really interesting ideas in the sagas. The moment they are at their best is the moment where the entire thing breaks, and the saga authors go, wait, was this bad the whole time? So, right, you can think of, like, Njal Saga, when the saga wraps up, but with Flossie and Kaori just writing off the whole business, and saying, no, no, we're done murdering each other, it's fine. Or Eil Saga, when Eil composes Sonatorek, a poem mourning the death of his sons due to shipwreck, but also reflecting on his life, and forswearing all of it, basically going, I regret everything I did. You have Grettir Ásmundarson sobbing to himself in the wilderness due to curse and outlawry driving him to sheer lonely desperation, afraid of the dark. Or my personal favorite from one of the contemporary sagas, the burning of the farm of Flugimiri, when Sturla Þórðarson, the author, has to describe the widowing of his daughter on her wedding night. You can hear the despair in his writing. And those are the moments that stand out to me with the sagas. The moments where it all goes, wait, this entire system of masculine revenge, of this negotiation of honor to the death all the time, is terrible and results in nothing more than the death of young men. And the amount of trauma that inflicts is something that never really gets explored. It's a case where, because you get the reward of Valhall at the end, according to the movie, it almost tempers the trauma of all that violence, where the movie really should have dug into it. And so here's the thing that I'm terribly, terribly afraid of, and the reason why I'm mad that the movie is so good. White supremacists fucking love this movie. Like, I've already seen on message boards how many people love this movie. They love that, unlike Vikings Valhalla, there's no people of color in the movie. They love that it focuses on ultra-masculine raiders violence. And they love that they get rewarded for that. They love that people get rewarded for that. And so, even though the movie tries to let Norse society speak on its own terms and let the critique of that society emerge organically, what that actually ends up being is free passage for the white supremacists to be like, yeah, you know, we like this movie. And unfortunately, there's a lot there to like because it never quite goes far enough. So, what I would have loved to see is that they turn every single dial of critique one step farther, right? So, they show the BJ581 Warrior Woman. You know, take the primary critique of the 2017 work, make them trans, right? Make them a trans man. Oh, you've got Ukrainian and Irish slaves in Iceland? Have an Iberian one. Have a North African one. You've got someone raiding in the Rus? Make one of those people Tatar. Or Bulgar. Or, part of the raiding culture is not just Norse, but is also Asiatic, Turkic, Arab. And really bring in those peripheries that one notch more. Instead of just making it so everyone dies, and there is this upswing at the end where there's a future generation who will go forth and do great things, very Saga style. But what if that doesn't exist, right? What if there is no guarantee left, and you just die? Bring out the trauma, bring out the violence inherent to this, and force them to confront that for longer. And from there build out a critique of the entire masculine culture that says trying to turn yourself into more animal than human to inflict violence. Make all of that bad. And do that by highlighting the diversity and by really sitting in the trauma just a little bit more. It's already over 2 hours long. I'm sure they didn't have a lot of time to play with, but I want just a few more moments of really addressing that and having to sit down and talk and fight with each other with words and understand the depth of that trauma. And then if you come to blows anyway, it's that much more meaningless. Ultimately, that's like my thing with the Northman, is that it is so close to being a genuinely brilliant movie that is both good as a depiction of a Norse saga and as a piece of media that is unfriendly to fascists. As it is, it only succeeds at being one of those two things.